Great. Good morning or afternoon, as the case may be. Frans, I am delighted to be talking with you today. I was really looking forward to this conversation, which is part of the Uptempo Marketing Acceleration Series. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, and very excited to be here and have a good conversation about new ways of doing marketing.
That's great. That's great. It's not our first conversation, so that's why I was looking forward to it. We always seem to get into a spirited dialogue, and I'm sure today will be the same. So just really quickly for the audience, this is part of the Marketing Acceleration Series. It's a conversation about the evolving state of marketing operations and a variety of other topics, depending where the conversation goes. And today I am talking with Frans Riemersma, who is a veritable expert and influencer in all things marketing operations and Martech. I'll give it the quick background, and I will not do it justice, Frans, but I understand you are the author of a book on marketing resource management, which is the definitive book on the topic. You're also an expert in how to assemble Martech stacks, etc. You founded Martech Tribe a couple of years ago, which is a growing community of marketing operations professionals. And seems like, kind of the crossing of the pond. I know you're now collaborating with Scott Brinker in North America on the publishing of the 2022 Martech landscape, right? Which tracks, 9,000 Martech vendors now. Is that the right number?
I was just doing an update and we passed the 10,000 mark.
10,000 Martech. I love looking back on it where it said 2011, there was 150, which, or was maybe, I don't know, maybe it was 2001 or whatever, 150. And I was pretty close to the 150. Like, I think when I got started in Martech, there was only maybe a couple of hundred vendors. So it's just amazing growth in an entire sector. One of the many things to talk about. But let's start off with just the topic of marketing operations, since you're an expert in it, and it's near and dear to your heart. I know you've been watching this space for some time. I'm going to say some time, could be decades. And you have some thoughts about the evolution of marketing operations, this notion of, first version 1.0 to 2.0. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What's behind that idea?
Yeah, sure. So my background is marketing and technology. So I'm coding myself. And back in the days, I called myself a marketing developer. Tough luck. I should have called myself a chief Martech and start a blog. Failed to do so. Yes, I co-wrote a book on marketing resource management, as we called it back in the days, and still sometimes do, together with Romek Janssen, working with you guys as well. Mm-hmm. So, and laying the foundation of what is marketing resource management, managing resources. Now it evolved into something called marketing operations or marketing ops. And having a lot of conversations with people around the globe. That sounds big, but as we craft, the vendor landscape together with Scott Brinker, we speak with a lot of people who want to contribute. We're not stopping them. So we have conversations about what is marketing ops doing in your area. And I noticed that, when we wrote the book with in combination with a lot of CMOs who are working on print, offline, TV, radio. That is gigantic. That's a gigantic operation. How can you make sure that even aligns with your website or maybe a mobile app? And this has been around, I think, for 20 years. We wrote the book some 10, 12 years ago. So, and that was, drafting and writing up what we have seen so far. So that's at least 20 years. And marketing ops, what I also see is very much linked to marketing automation. So that's a narrower type of communication. It's more online, it's more digital. So I think those are two different ways of looking at marketing ops. They're not contrary, absolutely not, but it's something that I think will converge and it will marry over time. But when I speak to people, and there are even people say, but there's a difference even between marketing ops for B2B and B2C, right, which has to do with the volume, with the intensity, with the specificity of the messaging, the personalization or individualization. So those are differences that I've seen happening. And so the marketing
it's funny, it seems to me, you mentioned the B2B versus B2C. To me, it seems like that's the most logical distinction to make between this 1.0 and 2.0. So I'm quite old at this point. I've been doing marketing a long time, and it's almost always been digital marketing. Marketing is digital marketing. There's no distinction between digital and non-digital, but that's perhaps because I've been in B2B so long, and B2C, that is not the case. Is that kind of what categorizes 1.0 versus 2.0, and how do they come together?
Exactly. So what you see is with B2C, you have to be out there, out of home, on the streets, television, and all that is now changing. So also those marketing ops teams, and you could say really in the old days, but now I'm talking 20 years ago, it all started with an in-house agency, insourcing an agency, starting an in-house, and it was all print. They were often called studios, and they did print management and all that kind of stuff, and post-production maybe for
Sure.
Television, commercials, etc. And yeah, that's something where you have a large scale, and you need to make sure it's all aligned. You need a lot of MRM in there. Now with marketing automation, we have a different challenge. So it's more digital. We need to integrate a lot of those tools. So not integrate only messaging, but also the solutions. So I think, and I have not seen that yet. So that's very exciting why I'm talking to you guys, that should marry.
Right. No, it makes sense. Do you view MRM as a form of marketing automation, or do you have this distinction between MRM tends to be the more B2C, high volume, more print, more brand stuff, and marketing automation tends to be the more B2B, more digital, more lead gen, more, or no, that's the wrong way to look at it. They're actually both automation platforms.
That's an interesting one. So I also teach at the business schools and universities. I teach marketing automation. So, the people have to make a plan, implement it in the companies that they work at. And it's typical that, B2B usually is bigger in marketing automation in the sense of lead gen. In B2C, if they use it, it's more for brand awareness and making sure there's a loyalty program or something like a newsletter, those kind of things. More or less personalized, but it doesn't have to be that specific. And there's very interesting research from, I believe it's Serious Decisions, where they say the higher the price of your product, the more interactions and messaging you have. So there you have it. With B2B, you need to be more on top of all your messaging, have more diverse, have a better customer journey. Whereas, if you buy a bottle of Coca-Cola, you don't need a whole customer journey, I think. So that's where you see that difference happening, but it's still, to make sure you sell that bottle of Coca-Cola, you need radio, television, you need billboards, you need everything. So that's also a huge organization. So in both cases, you need a huge orchestration behind it in terms of resources, budgets, content, customer view, insights, reporting, and what have you.
Right. Okay. Very, very interesting. So if that's the case, you need this infrastructure either way. And you look at marketing operations and its evolution. Has the term marketing operations become too associated with marketing automation or even Martech itself? Has it become consumed by the configuration and implementation of tech stacks, in your opinion, or not?
I see many different flavors. I was so curious. I had exactly the same question. So last year I did a poll on LinkedIn, and I found out that 50% of the people that participated, I think it was almost 200, and they said something like, 50% we have a marketing ops team. And then I was so curious, I did a little extra research with some of the people I work with, and we said, let's dissect all the profiles of the people who voted. And then we found out a very interesting difference and distinction between the States and Europe. So 80% of the American people that voted took part in the poll. They say we have a marketing ops team, with a title, with a mandate and a budget, as opposed to Europe, where only 30% said we have such a thing or called that way. Then there was another 30% that said, we call it that way, not that way, but we have something similar. Right. So I think that's a big distinction, and it might be also, but this is a bit difficult to research or to support with evidence. But I do have a feeling that in Europe, because there are more countries, more languages, more differences, also in strategies for one product, for one brand, you have different strategies in different countries, also by law. So that, I think brings a different dynamics with it. And then you have another challenge there.
Do you feel like, independent of the distinction, it's interesting. Now we've talked about B2B versus B2C. We've talked about Europe versus North America distinctions, right? And particular, the distinction in Europe being so many language having to support, necessarily you would have to have so much more content management or digital asset management involved, which is typically part of that MRM stack. But just in general, did you ask this? And if you didn't, I'm curious about your feeling. Who is responsible for the more operational side of marketing? And what I mean by that is, it seems, at least in North America, marketing operations is primarily responsible for the tech stack. That is how you execute, how you activate your campaigns, how you get your message to an audience, especially on the digital side. If that is the case, who's responsible for how marketing operates, the business of marketing, where you do strategy, planning, financial management, people management, program management, or project management? Who is responsible for that? Is it a marketing operations function? Is it a different function? Is there a different role that's going to come in there? I'm curious.
Very good question. What I see so far is that, for instance, we did some research on how old are the companies, which year are they founded, and then we looked at marketing automations as opposed to DAM and MRM, for instance. And DAM and MRM are way older. So there's a huge distinction. And I think that plays with this, first type, second type of marketing ops. And what is happening? So in early days, we detect a problem of this fragmentation of orchestrating what is happening in marketing. And it also comes with the fact that there's so many different skills involved. People management, like you just said, you have to do data science, you have to do technology integrations, coding, experimenting, and what have you. So that is so complex. And I think that the golden age for, let's say, marketing ops still have to come. So the fact that I'm raising this difference between, hey, there might be two different marketing ops, assumptions or notions. I think that is the first step in saying, let's marry everything and make this an official role. And that's very important. Make this ops role strategic. Maybe it's counterintuitive to the word, but it should be. So that's one thing I say. So if people tell me, yeah, we have an ops team, then I always go like, okay, are they involved in strategy and planning? Because they should be at the beginning of every process, not at the end. Right. And then they go like, oh, is that? So there you go.
Yeah, very. We see that as well. Obviously, Uptempo, we deal with a lot of marketing operations team, and we see like that starting, at least the realization starting to happen, right? That the term marketing ops, just like there's CS ops and there's engineering and DevOps and everything else, kind of started out in very tactical configuration stuff, actually, like the production. And now it's being pulled into a much more strategic role. We're starting to see that. Sometimes it's not called a strategic marketing ops or a VP of marketing ops. Sometimes we see a kind of a chief of staff role emerge, or there's someone that's in an office of planning that kind of takes on that role. But I do think it's an exciting and promising new direction for marketing operations. Because
100%. And it should be integrated. It's normally you see people who are responsible for budget and maybe sometimes for procurement. They're not integrated into campaigns or the new strategy. And those are marketing ops people as well. And they sit normally in a different function, different role, different team. So yes, it's very much linked to technology, especially when you're talking about the automation part of marketing. And there's so much that it's a gold mine, really. These people are sitting up, they're producing the reports, on a monthly basis. They're updating the flows. They see where the frictions are in the customer journey. So recently I do benchmarking for companies. So I look at what, is missing in the stack or what should be added. And I always mainly advise, assign somebody called CX custodian, somebody who's taking care of the customer experience, and then translate it back into architecture, into your data-driven skill sets, into integrations, into what have you. and then reverse engineer that part, and call it CX custodian or whatever you want to call it, but assign someone who you always have as a kind of a beacon and saying, is this still working? I remember in the podcast series we did last year for your company, it was Scott Vaughan who said, marketing ops, or whatever we want to call it, CX custodian or whatever role we have where we put ops in a strategic role, it's all about telling the customer story well at the boardroom table. And from there, you can then explain to the CEO, but we need this tool and we need that integration and we need that calendar view. And then it makes sense. Then it's a no-brainer.
Right. That's an interesting way to present that argument, right? To make that defense or make that ask is centered around the customer's experience. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I know that this kind of related to the conversation that you and I have been having over the last few weeks around this concept of marketing business acceleration. I'd love to turn maybe conversation towards that, this idea, this concept. It seems like it's just another new 3-letter acronym, right? There's a lot of 3-letter acronyms in the tech market and certainly in marketing. But perhaps we can dive into that. This notion that the marketing resource management space that you have followed, you've written about, again, you wrote the definitive book on it, etc. It may have gotten bogged down a bit, right? Might have slowed. Like the interest in it has slowed somewhat, I would say, compared to other tech sectors in Martech, according to the Martech landscape. MRM is not the fastest growing of those. And why is it? And there's some theories around that, right? One theory is that it's so focused on efficiency. The actual name itself, marketing resource management, is not the thing that you would bring to the board and say, this is critical to the customer experience, right? It just sounds like how to save money, how to be more efficient. Have you seen that to be the case? Do you have any ideas on this?
You're talking about that it's not the fastest growing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, marketing resource management. Why is there more investment in tools that essentially become the infrastructure of how you run marketing? It seems like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. So based on the research of 800 stacks, global stacks in different industries, what we see is that, and actually it's a no-brainer if I tell you, but right now you're probably guessing, okay, what? The first tool, CRM. We need to put all our clients in one place. And I still run into big corporates that have not CRM in place. And if they have it, it's not well structured. You can't scale it. And that's one thing. So, and then the next step is, okay, now our leads, we have to put our leads in a good place. So that's marketing automation. You need a website. Okay, cool. And now there's CDPs that, connect the touch points and we get a feel for what clients and leads are doing across the board. So that's the system of record. And that's basically where many companies are working on. Now, the problem there is also these technologies tend to reinvent themselves. So CRM becomes now again in focus because of first-party data. Now you have headless CMS or headless CDP, etc. So there you go. So, and this keeps them busy and that prevents them from, getting into the MRM space where you can really nail your marketing down in a good way and say, okay, now we're fully in control, fully optimized and very mature. You have built this maturity model that you shared with me, the 1, 2, 3 levels. If you want to reach 3, you need to have maybe your system of records like CMS, CRM, marketing order in place, at least and the thing is there that they try to first implement everything all the time. That doesn't work. So now they need to learn, okay, let's just make sure we have the minimum in place. And then you can pretty quickly move to MRM type of solutions, approaches, which is very important because that's where you learn about the customer, what works, what doesn't work. And if you're stuck in implementation. So normally I tend to say also at business schools, they come to me and say, we need more data, more technology, more resources. Well, if you say that, you haven't done your homework. Sorry.
Right.
What it means, what you should ask instead is, I need 1.2 full-time equivalent more with an integration between these two technologies. And then this is my ROI. And that is something typically, these business cases you can build across the board with MRM. And still there's not that notion of across the board. So I spoke to from a big supermarket chain back here in Europe. I spoke to a marketer and said, I have full visibility on every dollar we spend. I looked at the data and I said, this is media budget. It's not everything you do.
Right.
Oh, really? Okay. Should that be involved? Yes. At the business school in university, we always include all the costs, resources, everything. Every minute you, well, not spend in the traffic jam, but it's all included. It's all in the game. And that is something, that notion is so important. And I think a concept like marketing business acceleration could really help that.
Yeah. Interesting. I think just the idea of cost and making sure you have a complete view of your costs and factor that into what your efficiency or your return is for those dollars. I mean, it seems like it's basic stuff. Now, this concept of marketing business acceleration we're positioning it as an operating model, an actual operating model, which I think is an interesting term, right? There's frameworks and there's maturity models and there's best practices and KPIs, but an operating model is actually something that governs what you do, when you do it, and for what purpose.
Yeah.
Similar to, I don't know, you could say, again, this is more North American, but like, I think it was Serious Decisions, which is now Forrester Research, published years ago what they called the demand waterfall, right? This idea that you put leads in the top of a funnel and they convert their way down eventually to pipeline and revenue. And then with that model, they had benchmarks and they had best practices. And here's where you would do nurturing, and here's where you do lead scoring, and here's where like all of this kind of like, it's a framework that marketers can follow to execute marketing. And the same can be said for having that type of framework for the internal operations of marketing. Here's how you do strategy to goals and goals to plans and plans to a budget, right? And from there to projects and programs and how those get executed. And then from there to something that connects all those from a cost basis to a performance basis, you can get the true ROI. That's the notion of the operating model. Have you, in your experience, you do a lot of consulting with some very sophisticated organizations. Have you seen that implemented well in maybe more sophisticated organizations, and it's just the rest of us that are trying to catch up and become more mature in operations?
Yeah. So in essence, what you do, what you talk about, the marketing business acceleration and making some, simple definitions that are not so simple, because, to make the complex simple is pretty hard. But as you said it nicely, the more sophisticated companies do exactly that. They know exactly what a SQL, MQL is, for instance. And it's basically the notion of guardrails, When I go into a company, one of my first questions is, so do you have service levels agreements? Do you have a governance model? For instance, when do you on and offboard a tool or an agency? What are the criteria? And they have no clue. Well, normally it goes like, yeah, we have that. Then I ask, okay, send me the document. They go, no, it's in my head. Sorry, that doesn't scale. So yeah, that is still not out there, but it's basically something you would expect people do first, but it's not the case. People first implement tools, then bump their nose and go like, okay, we're implementing the tool, but actually what are we using? And then more mature companies say, okay, actually from this suite of modules, I only use 3. And from that, I use these feature sets really often. Those make a difference. Okay, now you're kind of mature about what you know and what you need and what drives value. Okay, the same applies to skill sets. The same applies to which type of budgets, make a real difference.
Right.
And from there, you start to understand, okay, but these are the notions. And I really like what you said, the concept of playbooks, for instance. You mentioned something like, we have a project that belongs to a program, to a charter, or what have you. And those playbooks are missing. And I think that would be really important. In the past, I created with companies playbooks such as what we call the one briefing document. The briefings all over the place. Marketing is flooded. The influx is over the top, and then you don't know if it drives value. So, okay, first define your strategy. What are the 3 criteria that we measure every briefing against? And then within 5 minutes, you know, okay, it's in or out. And then when it's in, your influx decreases, and then you deliver in time. That's more easy. So that's the one briefing document, and it's cascading, like you just said, you know, program,
Right.
project. And the same applies to 7 milestone approach. That's another playbook we created. It's something like every single marketing material you create, be it a web banner to a TV commercial, I don't care. It takes 2 minutes or, you know, 2 years or 2 months. It has the same 7 milestones. What you do in between, I don't care. I don't care which agency you use, but these are the line items you use in your budget, and that's how you do it. So there's always a beginning and the end. So those 2 out of the 7 you can give away. There's one in the middle that says, okay, we're agreeing on the artwork. Let's go build it. And then there's some extra ones you can tailor for your company. So that's how we started creating some playbooks. And that works well. So every new person that came on board said, okay, I got it. These are your words, your terminology, your definitions.
Right.
This is
yeah, it makes total sense to us. So we have customers similar to you. We have customers that come to us that, of course, they have challenges in deploying their Martech stack, and they might be, you know, in that situation. It's like, oh, we have a problem, so let's buy a tool. You know, that's the wrong way to think about it. But many of those companies have defined notions of how the tool should work, right? They know the concept of inbound marketing. Let's say in B2B, right? We publish content, we optimize it, we attract people, we convert them on our website, and they know how that works, right? And what the metrics are and the tools. They might not be great at implementing it, but they have that concept. The same as they have some notion, even today, like a more recent one is this concept of account-based marketing, right? Where you kind of flip the funnel and you start with your most, you know, your most key accounts you're going to go after, and then build a plan for execution against those, right? That's a more modern kind of framework. And yet very few of them come with what you just said, like, oh, we have templates and an agreed upon understanding and an operating model for how we're actually going to plan all the way through execution and measurement. Yeah. It's really just the execution side that they have models for, which seems strange. Maybe it's something that's not taught in university if you get a marketing degree. I never got a marketing degree, but it seems like people are trying to make up what you know, just have the standard language, the terminology, if you will, for how you run marketing.
And I think, and this could be the case, that more and more you will see that the marketing business accelerator or team or whatever entity it will be in the different companies will become very critical and pivotal. I had a conversation recently with Scott Brink about projects, process, platforms, and what have you. And I came up with the idea that marketing ops or marketing business acceleration type of people will define the future of companies. Now, I know that sounds bombastic, but I can explain a little bit. So what you do, you know, software becomes more and more important in companies, but that is not only it. You know, companies become software. So if you look at John Deere, for instance, they sell tractors, yes, but on board they have IoT, and IoT is measuring, you know, how well the crops are growing compared to the neighbors, compared to other countries, and they can give you a database. So now you have data, you get it in a portal, subscription, now they are software. So how does that happen? And it happens through this, you know, marketing ops. We do projects, you know, we're firefighting. Those are projects, you know, beginning, end, panic, and then that's it. But once, and this is typically the skill of marketing operations, we start to see patterns, and we start to templatize, like you just said, you know, create playbooks. And once you start to standardize stuff, you can automate it. So it's project, process, product. And now suddenly you are a kind of a product creation department, a product marketing, product management department within your company. Maybe not doing it yourself, but driving it. You know, we have low code, we have no code, those kind of things that all come with the territory. So they can really become not only the drivers of innovation in marketing, but for the entire company. Again, it sounds bombastic, but it does make sense, right?
It's not that bombastic. Because what other business function has had, frankly, more transformation in the last 15 years than marketing? It suddenly has become the steward of, it's got the most sources of data, it's a fire hose of data coming at it. That data needs to be interpreted to run the business strategy. So I mean, isn't it expansive? Do we have a ways to get there? For sure, but it is a likely outcome. Where else will that product information come from, if not from all these myriad of direct touch points with the end customer? And
So
I think that complements this whole idea of marketing business acceleration, because while marketing is challenged on so many fronts, right, with new sources of data and privacy regulations and they're like this never ending list of things for marketing to figure out. In some ways, I feel like one of their biggest challenges is agility. We've been talking about agility forever, but not agile, the methodology. It's much more, okay, if you're able to collect the data, do you have visibility into the data? Okay, good.
Yes.
Can you take action on the data, move in a direction, velocity, this idea of velocity. And then most importantly, when the data changes, how quickly can you actually change what you're doing? The notion of pivoting, or that's what I mean by agility. When a consumer preference changes, when a regulation changes, when market conditions change, when supply chains get disrupted, when everyone goes to work from home suddenly, how quickly can you react to that? It's a real challenge. That could be the thing that defines the winners and losers in the new economy.
Would you think that marketing business acceleration is also responsible for not only the technology, of course, and the integrations, the data, the customer, but also the skill sets of people, because that's normally the weakest chain.
Yeah, it's a really good question. This concept is pretty, as we've talked about, it can be very expansive, but trying to figure out exactly what fits into it is, I think, the next evolution. It's clearly the marketing resource management that you've talked about. Definitely part of it, right? We went into an operating model, the marketing operating system, that needs to fit into it. And on the performance, there's certainly, which is part of MRM, certainly the content, digital asset management. But when it comes to people, right? Do you have the right people? Are they in the right seats? Are they doing the right thing? And do they have the right skills? And how do you evolve those skills? I think that is a whole area that needs to be defined. What part of the operating model does that represent?
Yeah. So, for instance, you see a lot based on recent research that if you from Martech org. So if you change your systems, do you hire people or train people? And the vast majority is training their people, which is great. But now we have another challenge. So now we have the data available in the systems. Can you experiment? Do you have data-driven, techniques and skill sets to drill down and to understand what it's really saying? So again, with the business schools, they normally say, I need more data or a CDP. And my standard answer is, without even blinking my eyes, it's like, no, you don't. No, if you can't make sense out of the data you have already, because we have a lot of data, then what are we talking about? So go back and try to figure out. And then they come back with the notion, yeah, we need like 400 data points. No, you don't. You need 3 to 5, maybe about one persona or one customer journey. There can be more feeding into those data points, but you have to make a distinction between which ones are important and which ones not. And that whole notion, data-driven thinking. So I've been in working with supermarkets back here in Europe, where they said, we do have now everything made available in data sets. So it's almost like a data as a service. And the people just don't experiment. They don't have the skills. They don't know where to start. Or there was this other company that it took them 3 years to build this and to make it available. And now they've created a layer that does work finally after lots of training of the marketing staff. And they call it the data candy land.
That's a great name.
It's the candy store we're all waiting for.
Right. They've made sense of the data, and they can actually interpret it and figure out new business opportunities, new ways to service the customer, et cetera. And maybe perhaps even innovate on the business model, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And the marketing people do that, it's their data, because this was a different retail chain, not a supermarket, but it was a funny story. The data scientist that was hired by marketing to start working on the first day, he said, they told me, go to IT, we don't have data, we don't have access to systems. That was his first working day. And in 3 years, he turned it around and he had a data candy land.
Interesting. Very interesting. It's a great example. It's a great example. I love that is you don't look to grocery stores or chains as the leading innovators in the digital economy, but it's just a perfect example. Look, I know what we need to wrap this up, and I know you had asked me about, a topic that I think is when we talk about all the systems and process and data driven, actually it's a process that is much less data driven than many in marketing, which is branding and rebranding. And so I thought I would just quickly address that around Uptempo, why we rebranded. You had asked me that question.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you are rebranding. There are 3 different brands coming together. That is not a mean feat. It's not simple. And so talking about what is it? Tasting your own medicine or drinking your own champagne? Which one was it?
Yeah, it's definitely a case of drinking your own champagne, but it's challenging. The company formerly known as The Artist, formerly known as Brandmaker, is really the combination of 3 organizations. Brandmaker, which has its roots in Europe, actually in Germany, very strong player in marketing resource management, a lot of B2C customers, consumer brands, global brands. Allocadia, which is a company that was much more B2B focused, much more mid-market, real specialization around financial management and budgeting, and then Hive9, which is of the 3 companies, a startup really oriented towards marketing performance management and the planning side. So you take these 3 and stick them together, and suddenly you realize that if you put Brandmaker on the name of the company, then people have a set interpretation for what it is the company delivers. And the same with any of these. It made sense for us to combine and rebrand as a new company, Uptempo. And I think the word Uptempo speaks a lot to many of the concepts we just talked about. Visibility, speed, and agility, right? This idea of, hey, it's not just about managing resources, not just about efficiency. It's about being more effective from a marketing perspective. How can you get to market faster? How can you move quicker? How can you pivot quickly? That's the notion behind the name Uptempo.
I like that. That really resonates with acceleration, right?
Yeah, it's the idea. Kick it up a notch. Now, I'm not a musical guy myself, but I do like the analogy of the Uptempo beat.
Yeah, and I like that. Yeah, we should and we have to speed up things, more quickly. You can't always plan that far ahead. So I really like that Uptempo. One of the things when people ask me, so we should buy a tool that is future-proof. I don't know what future means to you or others, but we can't look beyond 3 years window. So, and that doesn't apply only to technology. It's about life. It's your family. It's your technology. It's your campaign, the strategy. It's just hard. And why would we try to mortgage the future? You can't. So, Uptempo, make sure that you deliver fast and learn fast.
That's exactly right. I think that's the idea behind it. Again, interesting project from a marketing point of view. Not the most data driven of things that you do in marketing. It's a lot of subjectivity. But that's the direction we're going in. Frans, I think we can wrap. Look, I think this was a great conversation. I learned a lot. I really appreciate your perspective that you bring on marketing ops and Martech, and especially, and this notion of 1.0 versus 2.0, and your bombastic predictions for the future of marketing operations. I agree with them, and they don't even seem that bombastic to me based on all the examples we chatted about.
I think it makes sense if you look at the future, but the future will tell. So thank you so much for having me. I love the conversation and looking forward to many more of these.
You got it. Thanks, Frans. Appreciate it. Have a great day.